I want to revisit a photographer that we looked at not too long ago, and I'm talking about Michael Kenna. And what we're going to be doing is actually looking at this book that I found that is not new, but is readily available and easy to pick up. This is Michael Kenna, Images of the Seventh Day. And I thought this would make an interesting topic for an episode, even though we already did a full bio on Kenna, because it allows us to dig a little deeper into some of his landscape work in particular. And this book is an excellent view into this. This book was actually a catalog that was produced for an exhibition of Kenna's work that happened in Italy, and I think it was 2010, called Images of the Seventh Day. So this is the catalog of what was in that exhibition. Extremely well-printed book, as you're going to see in a second, and there's some wonderful curatorial analysis in the beginning. And I thought it was really interesting because one of the comments that's made in this book is, you know, when you look at landscape photographers and some of the people who are better known and associated with the medium of being landscape photographers, you know, Kenna represents a really kind of a new generation of that. There's new elements that come into his compositions that, you know, and this is stuff that I've mentioned on the show before, you know, the elements of minimalism and the way he incorporates composition. It's a little bit different than what you're used to with certain people. But what's interesting is they kind of compared it to, you know, when you look at some of the classic photographers that you identify with being landscape photographers, and typically there's a region that's associated with people. So if you think of Ansel Adams, you think of Yosemite, or if you think of, you know, you can make a case for Bresson doing these night landscapes of urban Paris, and so Bresson is associated with Paris. Or if you look at Weston in Southern California, usually there's kind of a place that people are associated with. And what's interesting about Kenna is he does break these barriers down a little bit, and there are probably 4 or 5 places that I would associate with Kenna with off the top of my head. You know, certainly Great Britain. I think there are parts of Asia that he's associated with. Anyway, I think this is really kind of interesting and very different. You know, when you look at the modern age that Kenna lives in, and the fact that you can travel quite easily, and the fact that Kenna does, again, it's an extension to what he does as a photographer. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much. I want to get to some images here. So without further ado, let's go over to the table here and let's take a look at Images of the Seventh Day. So we're going to have a look at Michael Kenna's Images of the Seventh Day. Now this book is a little bit outside the regular catalog output that you see from Kenna, and as I mentioned earlier, Kenna likes to work in series-based projects, and oftentimes he will self-publish books that wrap up at least a phase of that project, or sometimes the project completely, and they're usually location-based projects. So what you're seeing with Kenna's books is a, you know, a very in-depth study of a very specific area of work. This is a career retrospective, and I really like this because this has a lot of images that I hadn't seen before, and I've looked at a lot of Kenna's work, and there's some really nice stuff in here, particularly the early stuff, and we're going to look at some influence within that. This was done for an exhibition in Italy in 2010. A couple things that are notable about this book. First of all, the critique and the curatorial statements up front are printed. I don't know if you're going to pick this up on the video or not, but it's a slightly different type of paper than what you're going to see the images actually printed on. So what I really like about this is optimized for reading and then optimized for looking at pictures, and so that's a really nice touch. The critical essays in here are excellent. They're posted in Italian and English, and I think they're just really nice. So anyway, what I want to do is I want to start with the very beginning stuff, and this is really some early images for Kenna. So what we're talking about here is around 1974. In fact, we are talking about 1974. This is taken in England. And what we're seeing is a very different look than what we're used to with Kenna's more matured, refined style that we're used to today. And you're seeing shots on 35mm. We don't have the square format yet. It's rectangular format. We're seeing more grain in the images. And compositionally, he is not to the point where he's dealing with a lot of the minimalism that we're going to see later. And I really love these compositions. I think that there's a real play with the atmosphere that he was doing, with different types of lighting conditions, different types of, you know, mist or fog. I love some of these night shots. And the other thing that's cool is when we think of Michael Kenna as being a landscape photographer, what we're seeing in some of these works here is redefining a little bit of what landscape photographer means. We're not just seeing landscapes in the sense of mountains and trees, but we're actually getting these little park scenes at night with benches and more urban types of textures. We do see some minimalism coming on early on with just, you know, the way the shape plays in the composition, but I really, really love a lot of this early work. I think that we showed some of these in the Michael Kenna episode. These come from '77, but, you know, other things that, you know, playing with lights and darks or darks on lights, you know, these white poles against the black background, and how some of that minimalist texture starts creeping in. I like this too with the deck chairs. Some really beautiful work. And I did mention also that Kenna early on was inspired by, of all people, Bill Brandt. And if you're familiar with Brandt's work, you start to see a little bit of that echoed in some of these, with some of the vantage points he's shooting from, the more high contrast images. I love these with the pole and the light. You know, very different than what we're seeing in Kenna's work later. And we're starting to see the square format creep in a little bit, but you do see, or I think I see, you know, especially with the wide angles, a lot more of that Brandt influence in some of these early images. And some of these are, you know, we're getting into the 80s at this point, but still fairly early in Kenna's career. You know, this is the point where he's working in as a printer and not known as a photographer at this point. So you're going to see a lot of more experimentation. And then it is about 1988 or so with these images. These are the conical hedges in Versailles in France, where the classic Michael Kenna that we know today starts to emerge. So we're looking at square format in some cases, but also these real minimalistic, stark black and white textures, you know, with this heavy minimalism that's coming through in the images. And I love this. It's almost like, you know, these crude shapes almost, because you know, the conical, I mean, they are shrubs or hedges here, so it's not perfect. And I love that imperfection. It almost has, you know, a very organic quality to it, you know, when you see it in high contrast like that. So really cool stuff. And then I also think that, you know, you're starting to see a lot of that come together as well. These are from the mid-90s also, and this was, we talked about this in the last video we did. This is the homage to Henri Cartier-Bresson that he did, of the trees with the road going through. But what I think is interesting about this collection here that we're starting to see are variations. And Kenna does a lot of this. You see a lot of it in the books that he does that cap off the series projects, but you'll see him explore things from different angles. And so I really like the play that you're starting to see within a lot of this. Sure, we do have the homage to Cartier-Bresson, but you're also seeing, you know, kind of a playing with that. I love this, with where you have the lines that lead your eye to the back of the hedge here. And so I really like a lot of that exploring that Kenna tends to do with stuff. And I think he's a very thoughtful photographer in that, you know, he continues to experiment, and I think that that's one thing to really learn from Kenna, is to, you know, exhaust all the angles. You know, I talked about that a long time ago when I did Masterclass Live. You know, see things differently and push yourself further. You see little experiments that crop up too, like this Rancho San Carlos from California with the long exposure at night, where you see the stars as part of the image, which end up making the background to this solo tree that's in the foreground. Really beautiful stuff, minimal, very basic, but really elegant and mature in a lot of ways. Another series that I wasn't familiar with, and it doesn't mean that it's not out there, it just means I'm not familiar with it, but the Quixote's Giants series. And these are a series of studies. So we have study 1, study 2, study 5. And again, I think what we're doing is we're starting to see, as a landscape photographer, that sense of exploration and experimentation. You know, you have different weather conditions, the white sky versus these heavy textured rain clouds that are blowing in. So a considerable amount of time was spent photographing these from different angles and really thinking about it. And it's also interesting too, because it starts to, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of location-based idea, where a lot of times we associate certain landscape photographers with locations. And I think it's because, you know, in our modern age, Kenna obviously is able to travel, has the means to do so, and does. And this is also, and I don't mean to be critical with this, but this is part of Kenna's thing that makes it sellable, I think, sometimes as prints, because you do identify certain things with a different landscape. I'm not saying, being critical of that, there's nothing wrong with that, but that certainly is a thing. You know, it's not just a matter of, well, you know, shoot, if I were able to go to Spain, I could get these too. I don't look at it that way. I think that he really is doing a lot of exploring with these and pushing that further, and you see that in this work. So anyway, the other thing too are these shots, and these are some more that I had not seen. And these are, they're studies again and numbered. So these are from Lace Factories. So this is Lace Factory, and these are on France. Lace Factory 29, Study 21, 30, and 37. And what we've seen Kenna doing is breaking out of doing landscapes. These are close-ups, they're macros, they're abstract a little bit. You just see this one with the little hooks lying down. It's a window shot. And I think that's interesting too, because a lot of this type of photography impacts the composition and the way Kenna thinks about landscapes. In fact, I almost wonder, I think a question to ask Kenna is would he consider himself to be a landscape photographer? In the end, it's all composition, and it's all these interpretations of ideas, which we've talked a lot about recently too, but interpreting ideas of line and shape and abstraction and the way things feel in a composition, particularly with the square format. Sometimes I think yes, he is a landscape photographer, but this allows that to break away somewhat, and it's just really interesting to see these collected here. The Easter Island shots are fairly well known of his, the moai, these large ancestral figures that they're huge and they're kind of mysteriously left on the Easter Islands, and people have different theories about how they were moved and such, but really, really amazing work. And then finally, when we start to get into the Radcliffe Power Station, a lot of the ideas with the smoke and the textures and the way that blurs into the photograph, and Kenna's, these are well-known shots. The other ones I want to mention too here real briefly, this one's playfully titled Mary Poppins Over Midtown, and then this one's the Chrysler Building, study number 2. I featured this one when we were talking about the interpretations episode of location, and I featured several way people have shot the Chrysler Building, and Kenna's no exception, and I think this is a really interesting take on New York. These are more recent. These are 2006, so they're not that old. So it's a little bit different direction for Kenna. Rather than dealing with the Zen minimalism that we see with a lot of the shots of things in snow and whatnot, we're starting to see these cityscapes, and there is a minimal quality to them perhaps, but there's so much rhythm and dynamics going on in these patterns that you see that are just made by the lights in the city. I think it's absolutely beautiful work, and Kenna there's a lot of New York work that's done in here. This is another one that I think is very different for Kenna. This is called Morning Traffic, Midtown Manhattan. And what we see here is a landscape, but playing against traffic with the shallow depth of field where your field stops in focus pretty far up in the foreground. And so you just end up with kind of the shape and texture and abstract, but also the way this deals with a reflection with what I assume is wet pavement here, which is really beautiful and really interesting as well. Another shot of the Empire State Building. I think there's yet another Empire State Building. Yeah, here's another one, Chrysler Building. But anyway, you see my point is different interpretations, different styles, different ways of shooting. If you look at something like these, just these 4 images, well, they group together. I can tell this is one photographer. So what are those thematic elements that he carries over? And sometimes this becomes a very complex thing. Use of shadow. I think the minimalism still has an influence on these, even though they're not as starkly minimal. So it's something to think about. And then finally, I just wanted to end on this one because I just find it so beautiful, but this is called Lighthouse, and this is in France as well, and this is from 2000, and it's a completely blurred shot, but there is such a beauty to that I really wish Kenna would start pushing more in abstract directions like that. I think he's probably wise not to, because he sells a lot of prints, but and his work is absolutely gorgeous, and I definitely wanted to share some of these with you. Another one I found really interesting too, and I'll end on this one actually. This is called Corridor of Leaves, and this was Italy in 2006. And if you have done any black and white film processing or printing in the darkroom, you'll probably realize how impressive this image is to actually have gotten. Where it's just really, there's not a lot of midtones. It's pretty much darks and whites, but there's so much going on with the hedges and the sharpness as it goes through here, and the texture you pick up in the leaves and on these branches. And I think this is maybe one of my new favorite Kenna images. There's just so much to that is just drop dead gorgeous that I love. So anyway, that is basically some highlights of images of the seventh day. I wish I could have seen the exhibition. It would have been really neat to see these up close and in person. But, that was 2010, and we have the catalog today, and it's widely available. I will link up to this book in the show notes if you want to pick it up on Amazon. Not very expensive, and I think it's excellent. So anyway, that's Michael Kenna's Images of the Seventh Day. I want to take a second and give a shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Squarespace.com. Build it beautiful. Websites, domains, e-commerce, and more. If you're not familiar with Squarespace, they offer everything you need to build a website, a portfolio, a blog, an online store. Basically, if you have business to do with a website, they have you covered. And they offer quite a bit for photographers, and I want to talk a little bit about that today because I really think they're probably the best in the business for this. Basically, with Squarespace, the first cool thing is you don't need to know how to code or anything about a web server or any of that stuff. It is an all-in-one solution. They have an unbelievably cool drag and drop content management system. So literally, if you can drag and drop a folder of images onto a browser and click and drag to move them around, then you can build a website, and it's that easy. The other really nice thing about Squarespace is they have you covered. So if you decide you want to do something with e-commerce where you want to sell prints on your website or even downloads of stock photos or something like that, they have all of that built into the system, and really you just start adding things as products, and you can sell actual physical goods or you can sell digital downloads. And they'll actually, for physical things, they'll even print out the invoice and even the packaging sticker for you. So all you have to do is just stick that on there and ship it, and you're done. And if you've ever tried to do e-commerce before, you know what a godsend that is, because they really just make everything easy. With Squarespace, you want to go here and sign up for their free trial. And whether you tried it or not, or whether you even think you're interested, they don't take a credit card, nothing like that. All you have to do is go here, sign up for the free trial, and you'll have a week to figure it out and see, play around with it and build a website and see if this is right for you. When you're done with your free trial, if it is something you want to subscribe to, I can save you 10% off of your order. And what you want to do is on checkout, you want to use offer code AOP, stands for the Art of Photography. So AOP, that will get you 10% off your subscription, and it'll get you started on Squarespace. And I would, whether you think you're interested or not, just go over and do the free trial, because it is pretty cool and it is very easy to use. So once again, that is squarespace.com, build it beautiful. And I want to give a special shout out once again to the folks at Squarespace and thank them for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. This group of work is particularly interesting to me in terms of Michael Kenna's greater body of work. We did an episode a couple months ago on Michael Kenna, and it was just on his full career. I think it's interesting to kind of revisit people from time to time and dig a little further into the work that they do. And I think that this exhibition, Images of the Seventh Day, really did a nice job of that. What I find fascinating about it is when you look at a lot of the earlier work that Kenna did, and you can see how he would develop this as an artist. You see a lot of the influences that he had in his earlier work, and this is not uncommon with people, but I think it's really interesting to study and see. I mean, I think his work now, he has a much more mature, defined personal style that maybe still has some of those influences in there, but maybe less obvious. So it's really interesting to look at a body of work like this and see how that progresses and evolves over time. Anyway, I will link this book up in the show notes if you're interested in getting a copy. I would do it fairly soon, because who knows how long it'll be in print, as I mentioned in the book collecting episode that we did last time. And if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and share it with your friends, and always subscribe so you are up to date on all the latest and greatest videos that we produce. And also, I am about to launch the new Art of Photography TV website, and so I would head over there. I'll link this in the show notes as well, but go get on our mailing list so you can get all the official updates. I don't send out a lot of emails, but when there is something to announce, like the new website, which I think is really going to be cool, I will make announcements there, so I'll link that in the show notes as well. Anyway, guys, once again, thank you for watching another episode of The Art of Photography. I will see you in the next video. Later.